All right, so let's continue with the session. I broadly gave you an overview about UML and then said that we use use cases for capturing the functional requirements, right? The rest of them, the structural models and the behavioral models, are handled by the technical architect. Okay, so this generally would be a responsibility of a technical architect, and this would be the responsibility of a BA. Okay, so we should be experts in writing use cases and capturing the requirements. Broadly, we use this, oval shape to denote a use case, right? So if something is written in this, that means it's a use case. Okay, what a use case is and all, we'll look at it, but that's a convention that we use. The symbol which is used to denote a use case is an oval shaped box. Okay. Now, use cases consist of two main components. Okay. One is the use case diagram. Then you have a use case narrative or use case description. Okay. So this is part one, the use case diagram. The part two is the description. For now, let's ignore the use case description. We'll just focus on the use case diagram first, right? Now, so what use case diagrams do is basically depicts what is it that the system is offering, right? So you'll have a system boundary, and then the system would offer some functionality, right? So you represent each of those functionality using these oval boxes, right? So it's some specific behavior that would be useful to somebody who is using the system. Who is that somebody? We call that as an actor. Okay, so there is an actor, there is a system, and then the system is offering some functionality which the actors would use, right? So there could be another actor who is also using the system, right? So he would use some functionality as well, right? So some of the functionality could be used by multiple actors. So broadly, what we are doing is we are identifying the system boundary and then saying that the system would offer these 4 or 5 features that the end users or actors, as we call it as, would be using, right? So pictorially it's representing us. This is how the system would look like. This is what are the features that they would offer, and these are the people who are using it, right? So a pictorial representation of your overall scope of the system, right? Now we still don't know what are the details about how the screens would look like, what are the validations you perform, what is the internal logic. Nothing is coming out in this diagram, right? Just a bit, it's more like it's giving us that bigger picture, right? So what is it that the system would do? It does this 1, 2, 3, 4 things. Okay. And then 1 and 2 would be used by this actor, and even 4, let's say, and 2 and 3 would be used by another person. So this could be a customer, and this could be let's say an employee. A use case diagram is a diagrammatic representation of what the system is going to offer, who are the people who are going to use, and how are they related to each other. So that's the components of a use case diagram, right? So you have use cases, you have actors, and then you have the relationships between them. Okay, so you have use cases which are defined by the oval symbol. You have actors which are defined by this, the picture of person. Basically, this view is coming out in this use case diagram. So the first thing that we do when we start documenting our requirements is create this view, right? So we would have list of the scope, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that the system is expected to do, right? So you have that list of scope from the SOW, right? So that we would convert it into a use case diagram, right? So we are saying that these 5 features maybe we can be translated into some 7 use cases, and these 7 use cases would be used by these various actors who will be using the system, right? So the use case diagram helps us to visualize what the system is offering, right? And it gives us a framework to ensure that we go in a methodical fashion of identifying each functionality and then elaborating it in detail, right? So like I said, there would be use case narrative for each and every use case that you have identified here, right? Now that use case narrative would consist of the details about the requirement. How does the screen look like? What are the validations you perform? What is the internal logic that, the step-by-step that you have to perform, right? What are those alternate scenarios, right? All those details are covered as part of the use case narrative, which is written for each of these use cases, right? Now so typically for a system, there would be one use case diagram, only one use case diagram, and there could be multiple use case narratives. Okay, clear about that? So do you get the structure of a use case now? Okay.
What do you mean by multiple narratives?
So use case, like I said, use cases consist of two components. One, there is a diagram. Okay, so the one which you are seeing here is a use case diagram. Okay, then the second component is basically a use case narrative or use case description, right? So we also call it as a use case description. Okay, now what use case description consists of it will consist of the details about how this requirement is delivered, right? Now let's say the first thing that you're doing is you're logging into the system. Okay, now so this use case could be login into the system. It could be as simple as that, right? Now we are not explaining anywhere about how the login screen should look like, right? And what are all the features that login functionality should have. All that is not coming out anywhere, right? So to capture those details, we would create a use case narrative or a use case description. Okay, so I'll briefly show you that framework also. So it basically consists of all the details, like the actors who are involved in it, the preconditions, postconditions, and all. So all that would be written, right? So anyway, we'll come out to that. So that's the second component, right? But the first thing what we do is we'll create this diagram. So this part is clear, right? So we look at the SOW, understand the scope, and then based on that, okay, there are the 10 things that they are requiring. So maybe that those 10 things would translate into some 10, 12 use cases. So we'll depict that in a pictorial view, and then say, these are the 3 or 4 types of users. We will call them as actors, and then each actor would be using these functionalities. So you link them. Okay. So overall, the use case diagram would consist of the use cases, the actors, and the relationships between the use cases and then the actors as well. Okay. So once this view is there, then we go and then start explaining the details about each use case. That is called as a use case narrative. So we'll come to that later, but this is the first thing. All right. So yeah. So let's get into a little more detail about each one of them. So basically, anybody who's using the system is considered as an actor. So by and large, all the users who are using the system would become actors. Okay. Now, if I am using the system, I would be an actor. Okay. And it's not just the people who are using the system. Sometimes, your system needs to connect to other system as well. So in those kind of situations, the system also would be considered as an actor. If you have to take a small example, let's say you're looking at the mobile banking app, right? Now mobile banking app would not store your account balance, right? So the application would not store the account balance. So that account balance is in some other system, but whenever you want to check your account balance, it will fetch from that system, right? So effectively, what we are saying is, the mobile banking app as a system is talking to another actor, which is the deposit system, and then getting your balance. So it's interacting with another actor. So we are considering the deposit system as an external actor, right? External system which we need to interact, right? I think we have the diagram for that, right? So whenever you want to check your account balance, the balance is not stored in the system. So what it has to do is it has to send a request to the deposit system and then get a response back. So for this particular use case, right? So there are two actors, the customer and the deposit system, right? So to perform this functionality, you would need both these actors, and both these actors would be interacted to perform that functionality, right? Yeah. So so effectively, an actor can be a person, or it could be another system as well. Then one single use case can have multiple actors. Like, maybe an employee is performing something, and then his supervisor is approving it, right? So both people are involved in that one single functionality, one single use case. So that's possible, right? So it need not be that only one actor can perform one use case. Okay, and usually the one which is initiating the use case, starting the use case, is called as a primary actor. Okay. So all these are like the finer details, but yeah, could be potential interview questions. So you could be asked about what all could be actors. So is it only people, or there could be systems? In some cases, time is also considered as an actor. So let's say there is a particular activity that you have scheduled every day, right? Now nobody is going and then starting it. So there is no system also which is going and starting it. So maybe it has to start every day at, let's say, 5 o'clock in the evening, right? So let's say you have to update the interest for all your accounts in a bank, right? So you don't need somebody to do that every day. You can automate it and then say, every day at 5 p.m. run this batch. So in that case, time is the actor there, and clearly actors are not part of the systems. They are the ones who are actually using the system. And the use case would basically specify a particular behavior, right? So I think we should have talked about the use case earlier. So use cases basically specify a desired behavior. So anything that you want to do from the system is considered as a use case, right? Now usually the functionality, right? So there are no hard and fast rule that this is how you have to identify a use case. So broadly, I would say there are these two guidelines which will help you in defining the use cases. Make sure that each use case is complete in itself. Okay, which means if you are talking about some functionality, right? So if a user is using something, so the complete functionality should be there in that. Like if I want to transfer funds, right? So that's one behavior or one functionality that I could use by using my mobile banking application. Now this transfer of funds, it should not be that it's explained half in one use case, another half in another use case, right? So try and make sure that all related functionality is in one single use case, right? So since this funds transfer is one single functionality, right? So logically it makes sense to have it as one single use case, right? So that's where make sure that the use case is complete in itself. So if I read a use case, it should give me the complete details about what the funds transfer is going to do, right? So it should not be that half of it only is covered here and the other half is in another use case. Okay. The second guideline is make sure that you don't combine unrelated features into single use case. For example, if you pick up a use case like you can't combine checking account balance and transfer of funds. Both are unrelated features, unrelated behaviors, right? Why do you want to have one use case with these two features, right? So create separate use cases. So it should be independent, it should be complete, right? A use case should make sense on its own and it should be complete. right? So it should not consist of 2 or 3 different features. Neither it should be split into 2 or 3 use cases, right? So that's a broader guidelines what we look out for use cases. Otherwise, it's very simple, right? Any behavior which the system, any functionality which the system is offering, which is of value to an end user, we call that as a use case. Okay, so so we create the use case diagram and then convert all that SOW, the whatever features we have in the SOW, into the use cases, and then we identify the actors. Then we would link those actors to the the particular use case, right? So you look at from the perspective of an actor. So this actor, this particular role, like let's say an employee or a customer, would use the system for doing these 1, 2, 3 things, right? So which are the use cases? Once we have this view of the use cases defined, and then you have the actors also defined. So let's say this is the use case diagram that we have created. So there are actors, there are use cases, there are relationships, right? So this clearly is saying that these are the features that the system is offering, and this particular person, there are 2 people who are using this system or interacting with the system, and this guy would interact by using these 2 features, and this guy would interact by using these 3 features or 3 use cases. Okay, that is all what a use case diagram is conveying. Okay, so overall I can look at this and then figure out, okay, not what the system is giving me these 4 features, and there are 2 people basically involved in it, and they're doing this using these 4 features available in the system. Now once we have this view, then what we need to do is we need to go and then explain the details for each of the use case, right? Now we have not talked about the functionality of how it's actually done and the details about it still now, right? So let's say if this is like check account balance functionality, right? I'm just taking an example, right? Now I don't know how the screen should look like for this check account balance, right? And where are the details coming in from? What validations I need to perform? Who can use this functionality? All those details are not clear, right? So where would those details would be covered? So for each of these use cases, we'll have to write a use case narrative, wherein we will specify the details about the use case, right? So it will talk about the flow of events, the step-by-step process, right? And what are all the the conditions that have to be checked before you start it, right? So a lot of details are covered about the use case in that. The second part of the use case would be the behavior. So first part, we have drawn this use case narrative, right? Sorry, use case diagram, which calls out the use cases, the actors, and then links them up. Then we go about explaining the details about each of these use cases, right? So you zoom into this particular functionality, use case 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you will start writing the use case narrative for 1, use case narrative for 1. Then we'll capture all the details about, how does the screen look like, what is the process flow, what are the alternate flows, exception flows, preconditions, post conditions. A lot of details are captured about it, right? So whatever you have captured in your illustration would come over into this part, right? So all your discussions with the customer, right? Your understanding of the requirement is finally translated into a use case narrative. Okay.
Does this use case narrative have a standard format? Like, I mean, for any kind of...
Not exactly, but broad guidelines are there. Most of the times, 80-90% of the format is the same. Right? So I'll cover that.
Okay.
I'll cover that. I'll talk about the use case format, and then we'll also look at examples as well. Right?
Okay, fine. Thank you.
But the main part is, you should understand the overall framework, right? So that's the reason I'm explaining some 3 or 4 times, right?
Okay.
So the way you should approach, first create the description, first create the diagram, and then for each one of them, you would go about, understand requirements, and then come back and fill in the details. Now, how do we fill in and what details we will fill in? I'll cover that later in the session. Okay. But that's the overall structure about use cases. It's a very simple way, right? So you're figuring out what are all the features that the system is offering, who are all the people using it, and who is using what. So this is the first step. So in your typical project, the first 1 week or so would you would spend more time in the use case diagrams, right?
Okay.
So once you get this view, then you will get into the details. Okay, for requirement one, let's discuss it tomorrow and then finalize it. So you'll specifically list down all the questions that you need to ask, then go and get those responses from the SME, come back and then fill in the use case narrative for this. Right? Day two, you'll go and then pick up another functionality, like let's say funds transfer. Right? So you'll say funds transfer. What is a detailed process? Then come back and then write a use case narrative too. Right? So that is the process for your use cases. I hope that's clear, right?
So once that SOW has been baselined, that is finalized, then we go through the SOWs, and then we acquire that requirement elicitation thing. Like we'll keep on questioning the SMEs based on whatever is the SOWs, and whatever answers we get from them, then we will come back and put it down into the draw and use cases, and draw as an use case narratives, and then to and fro it will keep on going, right?
Yes.
And this is a part of a BRD.
Yes. So all this goes into the functional requirements of the BRD.
Functional,
right?
Yeah.
So again, so it won't be like you complete the requirement elicitation and then you would start documenting.
No, it was parallel, hand in hand.
So it happens parallel. Like the first 1 week you will focus too much onto the the diagram. Right? So you want to first get that view. Right? So you'll convert that SOW into this use case diagram. Right? If there are like 4 features that you have committed in SOW, these 4 features could translate into some 6 use cases. Right? So you list down those 6 use cases. Then you'll identify the people. We call them as actors. Then you'll see which actor is using what functionality. Okay, so all that is done, and then you would say, what? Okay, I need to get details about this requirement now. So you list down the question, go ask that questions, get responses, and then come and document it.
Okay, and one more thing, like this will happen during the sprint, during a release process, right? I mean, before the release process, end of one release and the start of second release, then we will have all these things. Or beforehand, we have this.
No, this is more like a traditional SDLC process. So if you are working in a waterfall model, this would work.
And what about the agile methodology? I mean, how
agile
this
methodology uses a different way. We call that as user stories. That's a completely different way. I'll explain that later. You tend to use these use cases a lot of times where you are working in a full-fledged project, right? So what happens sometimes is you already have a system in place. Okay, there would be some changes coming onto the system. So the customers would, the users would say that what, we want to add some more fields in this particular screen, some more data points, right? Or some additional logic has to be added, right? So these kind of requests comes in. They are very minor thing, right? So in that kind of situations, a use case might not be relevant, right? So I think a couple of sessions back, Andy was also talking about it, right? So when you get in your projects, it doesn't mean that each and every requirement gets into a use case format. Okay. If usually it's a change request kind of thing, wherein the changes are minimal, and you're not working on a full-fledged system that you're developing, right? If it's all mostly the enhancements which are coming in, you generally have a template to fill in the changes, right? So what is the current way it's looking like, what are the changes that you are suggesting. So there would be a template, you'll have to fill that in and then close it out. Much simpler way. We'll look at it later. But in case you are working on a full-fledged system, right? So like you're working on a brand new project, like your mobile banking app. So there is no mobile banking app now, and you're developing it from scratch. So you'll have to, the approach to what you would take is this. Right, so you'll list down your SOW, from your SOW what all features needs to be there. So that translates into a use case diagram. You would identify the actors, the use cases, the relationships as part of the use case diagram. then pick up each of the use case and then explain it in detail as part of the use case narrative, right? So if there are 4 use cases, there would be 4 use case narratives. Now, what does the use case narrative consist of? It basically consists of the process flow, the checks that you will have to perform, right? And then, what if the user enters a different input than what you're expecting? How should you handle those kind of situations? All those details are covered as part of your use case narrative or use case description or the behavior of a use case, right? Multiple names, but that's what we generally tend to have, right? Now, one example of a use case diagram, mobile banking application if you want to create, right? Now, all we're saying is that there is a customer. So primarily, it's a customer who would be using the mobile banking app, and he would access his account information, right? There would be a register screen, there would be a login screen, and then, so these are nothing but some of the features, right? What is the customer going to do? First, he will register, then he will log in, then he could check his account balance, he could transfer funds, he could pay utility bills, right? He could do a lot of things. So depending on, we also added like make a service request. So let's say make a service request. So these are the 6 things that that are there in your SOW. So that translates into your use case diagram. Okay, so you'll end up with these 6. Now, when you're writing these, make sure that each one of them is independent and complete in itself, right? Now, if I pick up one like login, right? Now, login is a complete functionality. I don't need to, look at any other use case for this functionality. It's complete in itself. Everything is regarding the login is covered here. Okay, but so you'll ensure that the use case is complete in itself. Another thing is, try not to combine different functionalities. Like, check account balance is one feature and login is another feature. There's no point having like, login and check account balance as one functionality, right? So it should not be there. Logically related functionality, you should have it as a one single use case, right? So these are 2 separate things what a user would do, right? So don't combine them, right? So this won't make sense. Right, so that's a broad guidelines what we have, right? So make sure that the use cases are complete, are independent. Okay, so you'll end up with a view like this. So there are 6 things which the customer is doing. Now, for logging into the system, he will enter first. He will register he will log in. He will download the app from the Play Store, enter some basic details, and then register into the mobile banking app. He'll enter his account details and all, then he'll register. Then he would log in, right? So all these are handled by the mobile banking app system only, right? But let's say he wants to get the account balance, right? Now account balance is not stored in your mobile banking system, right? So it's not in your mobile banking system which is stored. Where do you get the balance from? So you'll have to look at you have to get the data from another system. So there is an interaction between the use case and an external system. So this becomes an actor now. The deposit system becomes an actor, right? So the customer would initiate this. He would say that I want to check the account balance. He would select the account. So this use case in turn has to reach out to this deposit system with the account number, get the balance and display it. Right? So this particular use case would interact with 2 actors. So the customer is asking for the account balance, it is fetching from this guy and then displaying it. So that is the reason you are showing 2 relationships. Similarly, if you want to do a funds transfer, right? So you first get the balance amount, then you would get to which account you want to transfer, and then you would communicate through the deposit system. Deposit system in turn would do the transfer, right? And then you get confirmation saying that the transaction is done. You will display that to the customer. Pay utility bills. Maybe you'll have to connect to a your payment network, something like that, right? So payment network, and then you'll pay the bills there. So there could be another system. So may not be the deposit system. There is another system which you're connecting to. So that would be another actor. Okay. So that is how you will figure out. Okay, there would be a primary actor who is initiating the use case, and in turn, if you have to reach out to another system, then you will connect to it. Like service request, maybe it will be sent to a CRM application. So that is how you would figure out all your actors, and then the use cases as well, right? So the first few days, usually you'll try to get this bigger picture. You'll convert the SOW, the list of features in your SOW. Now once we have this view, then we will start and go about and then explain each of the use cases in detail. We call that as a use case description. So we'll pick up, let's say, register. So how do you register? How does the first screen look like? Okay? And then what all validations you will perform? Then how would you confirm it to the customer, right? And then what is the next step? So end-to-end functionality for this register would be covered in the use case narrative, right? Or a use case description. So a typical use case description would consist of these details. The most prominent among them are here. So these are definite must in a typical use case. Any format you pick, this will definitely be there. The rest of them again are like depends on the template for the organization. Some add additional details, some just stick to the core details. But broadly, this is what you would see in a use case description, right? So you'll give a good title so that you can understand, meaningful title so that you can understand what is the use case about. Then you'll have the the version controlling details, who has written it, and then what was the modification dates and all, right? Then you give a purpose or an objective of the use case. So here we are saying that this is basically what the use case is expected to do, right? Like if I have to explain this, so this one is to successfully log. So this use case is to log in into the system. This use case is to register into the system, right? And then this use case is to check your account balance from your mobile banking app. There is a specific purpose which you are serving by the use case. So a one-liner on what is it that you are trying to do. Then you will give an overview about the functionality that you are expected to deliver. Okay. Cross references I'll hold on to for now. I'll explain that in the next session. So it's basically nothing but your references to other use cases and all. I'll cover that, but let's first understand the basic part, and then we'll look at the advanced topics in next session. Okay. Then you list down the actors. Who are all the actors involved in a particular use case? Like if you pick up a check account balance, there is a customer, there is a deposit system, right? If there is a pay utility bills use case, there is a customer, and then there is a payment network, right? So you'll figure out all the actors. Usually you list down the primary actor separately. So you'll say that this guy is a primary actor. So whoever initiates the use case is considered as a primary actor. Okay. Then you list down the preconditions. So preconditions are nothing but it's more like a checklist. What all should be satisfied? What all should be ticked upon? Before you can perform this use case, before you can execute this use case, what are the preconditions that you should be satisfying with, right? So that's covered as preconditions. Now this is more like a checklist. Like let's say if you want to log in, first you should have registered, you should be an active user, you should have an active account in the bank, right? Then only you can log in, otherwise your user ID would have been disabled, right? So you're basically saying that the checklist for logging in is you should have a active user ID, then you should have some active accounts, so something like that, right? So you're listing down all those conditions, preconditions there, right? Then you list down the primary flow of events, right? So what is the step-by-step process for completing this task? So if you have to check your account balance, so what is the step-by-step process? First, there would be a main screen. Let's say there would be a main screen where you have all those 4 options like check account balance, transfer funds, pay bills, right? Make service request. Let's say this is your home screen for your mobile banking app, right? Then you'll have to click on this. once you click on this, then you would be shown the list of accounts, okay, for which you want to check the account balance, right? Then you will pick a particular account, okay. Then the next screen would display the details that, you know, this is the account balance, this is on this particular date, and maybe, you know, you also want to display the last 4 transactions. You will display all that. You know, all those details would be covered. So this has a 3-step process. First step, you're displaying the home screen. From that, you're selecting something, then you're asking for the account number, and finally you're displaying the details. So this is the primary flow, right? Now there could be alternate flows also. Now, what if the user does something wrong? Like, you know, rather than select, when the user selects something and that account turns out to be inactive, right? So you'll not display the account balance there. You'll display a different screen and say, no, this is a defunct account, or a, you know, inactive account, right? Or this account is on hold, something like that. So an error message, something would be displayed, right? So that's an alternate flow. So it's not displaying you the account balance, but, you know, it's saying that it's giving you a different message, right? So that's all alternate flows also would be displayed, shown. Okay. So primary flow means that, you know, you're successfully achieving the purpose of the use case, right? If I want to log in, I would be successfully logging. If I want to check account balance, I would successfully check my account balance, right? So you're basically successfully completing the task, right? But all your alternate flows are where the user enters maybe an incorrect input. So an error message has to be displayed. So he's not successfully completing the task. Like, let's say when he's logging in, maybe he entered an incorrect password or an incorrect user ID, right? So the system has to, you know, respond to those situations as well. So there is a possibility that the user can enter an incorrect user ID. So you cannot just logging in to the system display a blank screen. So you have to say that, you know what, you entered an incorrect username. So please check and re-enter again. So an appropriate error message has to be displayed, right? So you have to handle that situation properly. That is called as a alternate flow. Okay. Then in some cases, you know, there could be a system breakdown. So, you know, sometimes the system could you know, shut down, or maybe the network is down. So the transaction is abruptly closed. And what should you do in that kind of situations is covered in an exception flow, right? So exception means the system is breaking down. Alternate means, you know, the user has selected an invalid input, right? So this is perfectly okay. The system is working correctly, but just that, you know, you're not able to complete your the purpose of the functionality, right? Like, you're not able to log in, or you're not able to check your account balance, or you're not able to pay utility bills. All those would be considered as alternate flows. Why? Because the user entered a different input. Okay. But exception flows basically means that the system is down. Let's say, you know, you're trying to reach the payment network, and this server is down, or there was a problem with the internet connection, right? So how would you handle these kind of situations are covered in your exception flows, right? So this is some, you have to be clear in this differentiation as well. What falls under alternate and what falls under exception, okay? Then you have your post conditions as well. So it's more like a follow-up activities, like notifications. Let's say you perform a funds transfer. So usually you'll get a message into your mobile saying that this transaction is done. Or something like, if you withdraw cash from an ATM, you'll get a receipt. Or you'll have to write your audit log. You'll have to record the transactions in somewhere so that, you know, your audit requirements are met. All those are like post notifications. What it means is, even if these activities are not done, it's not impacting your main transaction, right? So even if you don't get an SMS, that's still okay, right? So you're not going to cancel the transaction because you didn't get an SMS, right? So it's more like a follow-up activities that you will have to do, so that you know, once the transaction is completed, doing this notification or post condition activities done. Okay, so that's primarily the way a typical use case is created, right? So you'll create this use case diagram first, and then you would use the you would explain each of these use cases, right, using this description. Right? A small example is there for how to draw money from an ATM. Right, so we know the functionality. So go through that. We'll discuss this in detail tomorrow's session. I've kept. There are some issues. There are some things which are not complete in this. The reason I've kept it that way is because I can bring it out in the session. So if you read through and then figure out, what should we do in this kind of situation, right? So you should come up with those kind of questions. That is when your elicitation could be effective. So if you recall our interview session, right? So the elicitation model interview, I've given you a framework which is broadly relying on these details, right? I asked you to check what are all the checklists, then the primary flows, alternate flows, exceptions, notifications, right? So I gave you this broad framework for identifying the kind of questions that you should be asking, right? That's because you can come back and then fill in your details, exactly all the details into a narrative, right? If you have actually filled in all these details, you can be pretty much sure that your requirement is complete. It's as simple as that. Okay, so that is where your requirement elicitation and your documentation are linked. So you need to go prepared with these questions, ensure that you have all those details, come back and then document it. Okay, now it makes sense. How would you generally approach a requirement? How would your requirement elicitation go? What kind of questions to ask? And then come back and what to document it.
Yeah, sir, I just want a clarification on one point. That is like, for example, you took a mobile banking scenario for the use case. We drew the mobile banking use case, okay, with all the 5-6, with all the 5-6 features of it. Use cases. Sorry, use cases.
Used to the terminology. That's the reason I'm stressing it. So that so overall, this is called as the use case diagram. Each of these ovals are called as use cases.
Use cases, right. So we come and draw all the use cases, and after that, based on the use case, we write the description or the narrative of the use case.
For each use case, there would be a narrative, which consists of all these details.
Right, and okay, means like, for example, for login we'll write all the narrative for login use case. Then for registration use case we'll write all the narrative. But if there is like what to say, like suppose a customer logs in and then he checks, that connection is there. Then how do we show that in use case, or we do not show that in use case?
I didn't get it.
The reference, like like for example, what to say, suppose if we log in into a Gmail account, we compose a mail and then there is an attachment which is attached. So totally, if you see, it is two different use cases, right? Login scenario, compose mail, and then attachment is added. So how do we show that in use case?
So that is where you're differentiating between the use cases would come in. So I would say login is one logical functionality. Keep it simple.
Right.
So then compose an email. Your attachment should be part of your composing an email.
Right. So how do you show that in this?
So you'll have a use case called as compose email, right? And then attachment is actually a step in your primary flow. Right? Okay. So you would say attach. So when you're talking about the primary flow, you'll say you'll first enter the email ID of that person. Then you'll if there are any CC, you'll have all those details. Then you'll add the subject line. Then you'll add main content. Then you'll make attachments. So that is the primary flow of that particular use case of composing an email.
Okay.
So that is where the main problem here is to figure out how do you segregate the functionality into the use cases. So that's one challenge, right? It looks very easy because each one of them is coming out here, but when you start thinking through whether it's a process part of a use case or should I have it as a separate use case, that is where your differentiation would come in. right?
Okay.
So look at back to the guidelines what I've given. Make sure that a use case is complete in itself and independent. Now, if you have asked about the attachment as a separate part, right? Now it's not complete in itself,
Right.
So it's just a part of some functionality, right? So I would say, composing an email would be one functionality.
Okay, okay, I got
So that's a way of broadly validating whether your use case is good or not.
Okay, so similar way on the same baseline, like composing a mail is one functionality. Similar way, forwarding an email would be another functionality with having attachment as an flow in itself.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that is clear to me. Thank you.
Okay, then anyway, we'll pick some examples, right? And guys, I know for this topic at least, I would want you to work on some assignments, right? And I would not be prescriptive here. Pick up something, right? So whatever system you think you want to do it, pick up something and draw a use case diagram. Tomorrow's session, I want you to present your use case diagrams. I'll give you the option of presenting your screen, right? I'll allow you to present your screen. You have to show me a use case diagram and explain, right? So I'll randomly pick up some people and then you'll have to do that. Okay? So be prepared with those use case diagrams and then we'll discuss that. Right? Now, since this becomes a little more important, I'll want you to bring in that additional focus, right? So pick any example, right? So maybe it could be a hospital management system or a library management system or anything, right? So think through, visualize. Now, since we don't have a dedicated SME, we'll have to play a dual role. So you would be the SME, you would be the business analyst. So think through what all functionality you want in your system, and then translate that into a use case diagram.
So do you want us to use any tool and draw the use case diagram, or I mean, what do you suggest?
Huh?
Do you want us to use any tool?
Paper. No, write on a piece of paper, scan it, that's good.
Okay.
Right? I'll show you how to draw that later. Right? So
okay, fine.
That anyway should not be a big deal for you to
Okay.
write, right? So simply put it on a piece of paper, draw it, and then do it. Okay? So let's stop it here.